Hi everyone. So when we last met, we were on this slide and I wanted to move on to going over the um, the perception process a little more. I do want to say also, when I said the perception process is very close to the communication process, that's not exactly what I was thinking of. I was actually thinking of the listening process, which we'll get into much later in another lecture. So just scrap that, although there will be similarities. That isn't what I was thinking of. So that's my bad. All right. So moving on to, remember we selected some stuff from this. We selected what we immediately thought of, right? The hand on the face, the black and white picture, the fact that this is mid-century. He's smiling, she's smiling, they're holding hands, or what it looks like holding hands, and so forth. So what happens with selection is how we select things, and this is not, and any of these is we're not including a comprehensive list. This is just a sampling of how we select things. One thing is intensity. Let's say you're somewhere like at a party and everybody's talking and chit-chatting, but then one person just starts like, ugh, like yelling at their boyfriend or their girlfriend or their friend, or just maybe just yelling at for no reason at nothing. Like, who knows what they're doing, but there's a lot of intensity all of a sudden, or maybe there's a lot of intensity of emotion that doesn't have to do with anger, or intensity in some other way. We're going to immediately pay attention to it. Repetition as well. There is something in persuasion that when I was studying persuasion, and now I teach persuasion, which is basically this tested and tried concept that repetition breeds acceptance, which is really dangerous. So when we see something over and over and over, we tend to select it, and then we sometimes tend to like absorb it and identify with it or accept it, unless it's something we already refuse to accept. So an example of this would be the whole fake news thing, right? When you say fake news over and over and over, all of a sudden, every time somebody says fake news, it's like, yep, I'm gonna go with that and say it's fake. Ironically, the fake news phrase actually was born of the left referring to what Trump was saying in the 2016 election, and they were like, what he's saying is fake news, and Trump was like, kind of geniusly, like, I'm going to adopt that and turn it on them, and it worked. Like, I'm not calling Trump a genius by any length or any standard, but it was a kind of genius idea. And he did really effectively do that. But it doesn't necessarily have to be something that breeds acceptance either. It could just be somebody saying something over and over. And sometimes when we want to get a point across, a good way to do that is to re-emphasize the point we're trying to make within the larger picture that we're conveying. And usually we do this by paraphrasing it, not by saying the exact same phrase over and over. Sometimes we do this when we're giving somebody directions to like our home or somewhere else, and we might repeat certain things like remember this landmark or remember to turn left here or whatever it is. Repetition is going to help us select something. Contrast or change to what we're used to is also going to catch our attention right away. And again, this is not a comprehensive list. Obviously, we just went over things like this, and some of these don't even apply here. But contrast or change, this is a really extreme example, but just to get the point across. If you're walking down the street, maybe you're in New York City where there's a lot of people walking down the street and you're not really paying attention to any of them because they all kind of blend together. And then there's one guy wearing like, I don't know, a really bright neon shirt. And he's like, like, what's up guys? Hey, how you doing? And you're like, what is good? Like, he's going to catch your attention. Not necessarily because he's intense, but because it's a contrast and it's a change to what you're surrounded with already, but also what you're expecting. Expectancy violation, which is a concept within communication studies, is a huge concept, because when our expectations are violated, they tend to have a varying effects on us, but usually, most often, there is a significant effect in some way. Depends on the type of violation, whether it's a positive valence or negative valence. Sometimes people people like do things where we're like, I wasn't expecting that, but it's in a good way and you're really happy about it. But a lot of the time, usually when we talk about that, we're not talking about it in a positive way. As far as organization goes, the way we organize things, we try to find something that's going to be meaningful. First is physical, the appearance of something or someone, role-based as well, interaction, psychological state of somebody else. Psychological state would be, an example here would be President Eisenhower and how his psychological state here is happy, right? If he were, like I said before, if he were like, oh, what are you doing? Placing your hand on my face. I don't know where that hand's been. Then that psychological state of President Eisenhower would affect how we organize these elements that we've selected and to come up with an interpretation. Role-based as well. Like if you see somebody pinning someone up against the wall, like, and they're holding their arms up, and the person doing the pinning is dressed in a police uniform, we might think, oh, this person is about to be under arrest. But if they're pinning them up, and I hate this example, but I came up with it in class like a couple of years ago, just came out of my mouth, and I'm going to say it again. And I'm sorry if it's crass or inappropriate, but if they're wearing like, if you're at like a nightclub and there's like a disco ball and they're wearing assless chaps, like whatever they're wearing, then it's going to be, you're going to be like, they're not getting arrested. This might be part of a bachelor party or a bachelorette party. Like who knows what's going on, but that's going to change how you interpret the situation. So a role, how people look and what role you assign to them, whether it's a role of a police officer or some kind of authority figure, or if it's something else, that's going to change. Sometimes we look at people and we assign roles and we're wrong. A lot of the time when we assign things, we're wrong. You know, my mom the other day was talking about some people she saw, and she was like, how could they afford to go to this place? Because they looked really poor. And I was like, that's nothing against my mother, but like, you can't tell how much somebody or what status somebody has, what socioeconomic status they have just by looking at them. We make this mistake in the opposite way all the time. When I had my daughter, for example, I was unemployed because I had no one to watch her for the first year. And so we were really, really poor. I was on welfare and food stamps, and which was nothing. It was like, I think for welfare, I got $400 a month. So a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, the whole time we were really struggling. And, but my uncle bought me a Coach purse for Christmas. And my dad, who, I just want to say, who did not raise me, but I'm close with now, but he was like, here's my old Volvo. It was a really nice Volvo. And he was like, here you go. He was breaking down. He did not take care of that thing. But like, still, I go in with my Coach purse, driving my Volvo S80, and I'm using my food stamp card and my welfare card. And people, I'm sure, were judging me, saying like, she's taking advantage of the system. But the truth was, we were really, we could barely make ends meet. So sometimes it works the opposite way, in which like we see things, we organize elements that we've selected, and we organize them in ways that isn't necessarily correct. I feel like I'm making that point over and over, and I'm going to continue to make that point, not because I think we're always incorrect, but because I think it's really important to understand and to at least entertain the possibility that we're always missing some kind of information, and that judgments about people and about events should not ever be approached so one-dimensionally or dichotomously. Think about how you would want somebody to approach you in a situation, and understand like they don't know all the information. So think about that. Empathize with the other person. Be like, maybe I don't know all the information. Maybe I should hold back, because I would want people to hold back on judging me if I were in their position. So interaction as well. What behavior is exhibited? Here we go. What behavior is being exhibited here? They're not angry. So psychological state, here we go. Interpretation. As far as like this goes in everyday, especially in interpersonal or relational life and communication, relational satisfaction is a huge factor in how we interpret our, events that are happening, or how we interpret anything within that relationship after we've selected and organized. if you are married or you're with your partner and you're really happy in that relationship and they do something that, you know, you didn't want them to do, maybe they misheard you and they were like, take out the trash, and instead they, I don't know, this is so stupid. They took out like, I don't know, something else that wasn't trash. That's ridiculous. But if they did something in which you might be mad at them, but you're really happy with that relationship, you might forgive them a lot easier. You might interpret it in a way that was just like, that was an honest mistake. But if you're not happy in that relationship, you're probably going to interpret it in a more negative way, or maybe attribute it to something else that they've done in the past that was also that you perceive as like a dumb thing that they did. And you're like, see, this just confirms it. And actually what I'm saying right now is going to come up later in lecture as far as confirmation bias and attributions and fundamental attribution errors. So this all has to do with perception. Your expectations as well is a huge thing. And this can go either way. I want to make that very clear. So expectations could be like, I expect this to go this way. And sometimes we kind of like fill in the gaps or maybe like block out some stuff to meet the expectations we have. So maybe we go to a party and we really thought we were gonna have a great time and it almost got there. And so we just kind of like convince ourselves, no, my expectations are I'm going to meet my expectations as far as my perception goes of this party. But it could also go the other way. Maybe your expectations are really high and you go in and you're like, wow, that was horrible. But maybe it wasn't that horrible, but just because your expectations were so high, you saw it that way. As an example, in 1999, a film came out called American Beauty. Okay, this won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. And it's a great film. Don't get me wrong, it's a great film. It stars Kevin Spacey, but also really great other actors. It was Sam Mendes' first film who directed it, and it was brilliant. And all I saw, I was 16 at the time, and all I saw on TV were all these ads of like really like kind of avant-garde, creative, artistic shots, like somebody opening up their shirt, but like a bunch of rose petals come out, right? And then on top of that, all I was hearing about this film was that it was groundbreaking and it was the best film ever made and this and that. And people are really building this film up and up and up and up. So I go to watch it and I was like, well, that was a movie. Like it was, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't super avant-garde. But basically people built it up so much that there was like, I had this idea of what it would be like that couldn't possibly have been fulfilled. Like my idea at 16 was so naive that I was like, this is going to be a film that's just it was like in my head, it would be equivalent to like, I'm going to show you a new color that you've never seen before that doesn't fall into a shade of any other color you've known. And it's like, that can't be a thing. And that was my expectation for this film. So there's nowhere to go but down, which is unfair because it is a really, really great film. They were right. It was great. I feel like this happened with Barbie as well. Luckily, I saw Barbie as soon as I saw the day it came out. I feel like if I'd waited, I wouldn't have liked it as much because it was so built up after it came out. So expectation can influence your interpretation in both ways. Your personal experiences, I cannot emphasize this enough. Your experiences shape your outlook. They're not the only thing, but they shape you so much. Especially if, like it says here, if you've been cheated on, you're probably going to be more paranoid about that. But that's just such a narrow and kind of like isolated example. Experience in general, in ways that, I mean, that's a way that you might be able to recognize. Like maybe I'm being paranoid because I've been cheated on before. But in 99% of cases, your experiences are influencing your interpretations in ways that you do not recognize because they are so subconscious. Your personality as well. There's something called the Big Five personality test. It's a really great test to take, especially the long one. If you go on IDR Labs, they have that a short version and a long version. It's really fun to take, and it's kind of informing about ourselves. But our personality is something that is influenced by our experiences and our cognitions and our genetic code. And also our assumptions about human behavior. Some people see the best in everyone. Some people see the worst. They're like, I don't think anyone has any good in them. A former really great friend of mine, who I knew for like 25 years, used to say that like nobody has any real good in them. They always have an ulterior motive. And I was like, are you insane? Like, that's not true. But he really was like, people are not good people. And some people think the opposite. And most of us kind of fall somewhere in the middle. But you're more likely to see people and kind of like conform your perceptions to your pre-existing opinions about human behavior. You know, especially if you have a very strong opinion about human behavior, if it doesn't fall somewhere kind of neutral in the middle. And then negotiation. This is just something that, again, that happens after interpretation, when you start either listening to other people's ideas or you start talking to people's ideas. And sometimes nobody has to give you feedback. Just you saying things out loud, your ideas, might and often does encourage you or creates like new thoughts, or like, oh, I understand this differently now. And oh, that's what that meant. And so sometimes it's not even about what the other person is feeding back. It's just about you communicating it to somebody else. The negotiation process is very complex and multifaceted. Okay, sorry, I went through that kind of quick just because we've already gone over this a little bit. And now we're going back to schemata. So another example of schemata are stereotypes, social roles, worldviews. These are all part of schemata, and these really encourage and create these ideas of perception as far as what we select and what we want to pay attention to. Sometimes we want to pay attention to some things, and so we mindlessly pay attention to some while ignoring others. Another thing is distorted perception, which is similar, where you have your irrational and biased perceptions, which we all have, but some people have bigger biases than others. And that really creates, sometimes it bleeds into a lot of other areas where, whoops, I just knocked over something. It bleeds into other areas to where your perceptions then become not just like normally distorted, to where you're just kind of selecting things. Like, all of our perceptions are unique to us, so they can't be 100% correct. So I guess you could say, for argument's sake, they are in some way distorted. But that's not necessarily the right word to use, because they're still healthy perceptions, but sometimes they become distorted, and that is not a healthy term. It's not a healthy perception to have. And we have seen this. We see this all the time in film and in stories, and within people that we know. And so think about this. Think about like what you've observed, whether it's real or fictional or both, where you've seen how people's biases, their stereotypes, how their schemata affects them, where it creates this real distortion in how they're seeing things. And this can, I mean, obviously, I think the first thing that probably comes to most of our minds is racism when we talk about this, but it doesn't necessarily have to be bigotry. It can be a lot of different things. All right, now we're getting into perception of the self. This is a big deal. And because we're almost at 20 minutes, I'm actually going to break here because I want to give you guys shorter videos this semester. So I'm going to break here. I'm going to make a new video starting at perception of the self, now that we've finished the first part of our lecture.